Good morning and thanks for staying tuned. Welcome to our special coverage on a Russian invasion of Ukraine. I'm Ladi Akiriduluale. The headlines. Russian President Vladimir Putin appoints new head of Russian armed forces in Ukraine as the country's east prepares for a major new offensive. U.S. National Security Advisor commits to providing Ukraine with even more arms as United Kingdom and New Zealand join list of providers of more military assistance. And even animals and pets are finding life difficult as volunteers seek to keep them alive within the conflict. Russian President Vladimir Putin has appointed a new general to direct the war in Ukraine after troops failed to take Kyiv, its capital. According to a U.S. and European official, Mr. Putin appointed Army General Alexander Dvornikov, the commander of Russia's Southern Military District, as theater commander of Russia's military assault in Ukraine. General Dvornikov commanded the Russian military in Syria until Syrian forces gained the upper hand in the civil war. Russia's operations in Syria were marked by large-scale bombardments, including in civilian areas, and the destruction of cities. The new general was the first commander of Russia's military operations after Mr. Putin sent troops there in September 2015 to back the Syrian regime. Under the general's command, a Russian aircraft laid siege to the rebel-held eastern Aleppo, causing major civilian casualties. Meanwhile, a senior Ukrainian official says Russia's latest offensive in the eastern Donbass region has begun, warning that Russia continues to amass forces there. Vadim Dysenko, an advisor to Ukraine's interior minister, noted that there were explosions overnight in the Dnipro region and said the shelling of Kyiv, Ukraine's second-largest city, had also continued. Serhiy Haidai, head of Ukraine's Luhansk Regional Military Administration, said Ukrainian authorities were organizing an enhanced evacuation in the Donbass, adding that more evacuation trains from Luhansk and Donetsk were scheduled for today. And staying with the latest on the crisis, Ukrainian officials have said Russian forces have fired rockets into Ukraine's Luhansk and Dnipro regions, completely destroying Dnipro airport and wounding at least 6 people. Darina Sukin, spokesperson for the Dnipro region emergency services, said 6 staffers of the state emergency service had been wounded by the strike on the Dnipro airport. She also said emergency workers were working to put out fires at an infrastructure facility that was hit in the nearby village of Zelenskyy, adding that details on casualties were not yet known. Russia's defense ministry said the high-precision missiles destroyed the base and headquarters of the nationalist Dnipro battalion in Donetsk, which also recently received reinforcements from foreign mercenaries. And President Joe Biden of the United States will speak with Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi in a meeting which is virtual later on today as he presses world leaders to take a hard line against Russia's invasion of Ukraine. India has so far held a neutral stance towards Russia's invasion. It was one of 58 members of the United Nations that abstained when the General Assembly voted last week to suspend Russia from its seat on the 47-member Human Rights Council over alleged violations of human rights in Ukraine. Mr. Biden will talk about the consequences of the war in Ukraine and mitigating its destabilizing impact on global food supply and commodity markets, and that's according to White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki. They'll also discuss how to uphold a free, open rules-based international order to bolster security, democracy, and prosperity in the Indo-Pacific. And while all that is happening, the United States is committed to providing Ukraine with the weapons it needs to defend itself against Russia, and that's according to National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan, as Ukraine continues to seek even more military aid from the West. Mr. Sullivan said the Biden administration will send more weapons to Ukraine to prevent Russia from seizing more territory and targeting civilians, attacks that Washington has labeled war crimes. Moscow has rejected accusations of war crimes by Ukraine and the Western countries.
The images that we've seen out of Bucha and other cities have been tragic, they've been horrifying, they've been downright shocking, but they have not been surprising. We, in fact, before the war began, declassified intelligence and presented it, indicating that there was a plan from the highest levels of the Russian government to target civilians who oppose the invasion, to cause violence against them. The bottom line is this: there must be accountability. And the United States will work with the international community to make sure there's accountability. In the meantime, though, we're not going to wait for that. We are going to get Ukraine the weapons it needs to beat back the Russians, to stop them from taking more cities and towns where they commit these crimes, and also to squeeze the Russian economy to increase the pressure and the costs on Vladimir Putin and the Kremlin and the Russian government. That's what we're going to do, and we intend to work in lockstep with our allies and partners in support of the Ukrainians as they defend their country.
Commanders on the ground.
Also, British Prime Minister Boris Johnson has vowed to provide more economic and military assistance to Kyiv amidst the Ukraine-Russia conflict after meeting with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy at the weekend. Mr. Johnson arrived in Kyiv earlier on Saturday for a one-day visit. At the press conference after their talks, Mr. Johnson said the UK and its partners will continue to also tighten sanctions on Russia. The UK is expected to provide new military assistance of armored vehicles, anti-ship missile systems, air defense missiles, and suicide drones to Ukraine. And also, New Zealand said it will deploy a C-130 Hercules plane and 58 personnel to Europe to further support Ukraine against Russia's invasion. The team would travel throughout Europe, transporting equipment and supplies to distribution centers, but would not enter Ukraine. That's according to Defense Minister Pini Hidari. The government also said it will donate an extra 13.1 million New Zealand dollars towards military, legal, and human rights support. Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern said New Zealand's support was to help Ukraine repel the Russian invasion because peace in the region of Europe was essential for global stability. Russia calls its action in Ukraine a special operation.
I'm announcing that New Zealand will deploy to Europe a New Zealand Defence Force C-130 Hercules aircraft supported by a team of 50 Defence Force personnel to assist with the transportation and distribution of donated military aid to Ukraine. Our aid in all its forms is to assist the Ukraine army to repel a brutal Russian invasion. Peace in the region of Europe is essential for global stability. New Zealand is not immune to its impacts, so we do need to make sure we play our role in its resolution. Here we have a clear breach of the international rules-based order. We have a country's territorial sovereignty being challenged. We have a war which everyone can see. There is evidence around war crimes and impact on civilians. This is New Zealand playing our part, and it's a significant part.
In his nightly Facebook address, Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelenskyy leveled accusations of torture and cowardice at invading forces and told his citizens to prepare for Russia to conduct even larger operations in the east of the state. He dismissed Russian claims that civilian deaths across Ukraine were the result of Ukraine's own military strikes, calling them a sign of Russia's weakness, adding that they are afraid to admit that Russia's entire policy towards Ukraine has been erroneous for decades. The Ukrainian leader said that in order not to admit mistakes, Russia had made new mistakes. And according to him, quote, they deprived themselves of any political tools and unwilling to give up unrealistic ambitions started this war. He said when cowardice grows, it turns into a catastrophe. When people lack the courage to admit their mistakes, apologize, adapt to reality, learn, they turn into monsters. And when the world ignores it, the monsters decide that it is the world that has to adapt to them. Meanwhile, Mr. Zelenskyy said he had discussed possible additional sanctions on Russia in a call with German Chancellor Olaf Scholz and praised what he said was a more favorable change in Germany's position towards Kyiv. Germany, which had been reluctant in the early stages of the Russian invasion to provide Ukraine with arms, has now agreed to supply anti-tank weaponry and missiles. Mr. Zelenskyy, initially critical of Germany for failing to provide concrete help, particularly in an address to the Bundestag last month, has applauded Berlin's moves. And residents have fled from cities in eastern Ukraine's Donetsk region after Russian rocket attacks on a train station in Kramatorsk killed over 50 people. Streets across Slovansk, a city around 20 kilometers from Kramatorsk, appeared empty. A local military official says that the number of people taking the train in Slovansk had dropped significantly since the attack on Kramatorsk. Russia has failed to take any major cities since it launched its invasion on the 24th of February, but Ukraine says it has been gathering forces in the east for a major assault and has urged people to flee. Mounting civilian casualties have triggered widespread international condemnation and new sanctions, in particular over hundreds of deaths in the town of Bucha to the northwest of Kyiv that until just over a week ago was occupied by Russian forces. Moscow has rejected all accusations of war crimes and has denied targeting civilians in what it called a special operation to demilitarize and denazify its southern neighbor. Ukraine and the Western nations have dismissed this as a baseless pretext for war. And we had told you earlier that British Prime Minister Boris Johnson was in Ukraine over the weekend, and one of the things he did was to thank the Ukrainian rail workers in a video message filmed as he was traveling by train from Poland to Kyiv, where he met with the president of Ukraine. Mr. Johnson said that the name given to the rail workers, the Iron People, reflects the spirit that they are showing, the spirit of Ukraine, in standing up to the appalling aggression that they are seeing. The meeting between the two leaders was shrouded in secrecy until Mr. Johnson appeared in the Ukrainian capital. He is the latest foreign leader to visit Kyiv after Russian forces pulled back from the area, marking a return to some degree of normality for the capital.
And I just want to say a massive thank you to all the staff of Ukrainian Railways for what you're doing. I gather you're called the Iron People, men and women of iron, because that's the trade, the industry that you work in. But I think it also reflects the spirit that you're showing and the spirit of Ukraine in standing up to the appalling aggression that we're seeing. And I'm so sorry about the loss of some of your colleagues and comrades at Kramatorsk. And we in the UK stand in sympathy and in solidarity with you.
Let's get some perspective now from the Ukrainian capital, where we're joined by Dr. Johnson Aniki. Dr. Aniki is chairman of the Nigerians in a Diaspora organization in that region, and he wears quite a number of caps, which we will unveil as the conversation goes on. Let me start with the fact that he has been a resident of Ukraine, as I understand it, for the last 40 years. Dr. Aniki, thank you for your time. Welcome to the program. Now, we want to begin from what has been the experience of someone who has lived in Ukraine for so long and then having to live through this situation as we find it today. Dr. Aniki, I understand that you've muted yourself. Could you please unmute? Well, we'll try to get back to Dr. Aniki in just a moment while we sort out his own difficulties. The head of Russia's Republic of Chechnya, Ramzan Kadyrov, says that an offensive will be unleashed not only on Mariupol, but on the capital Kyiv and other Ukrainian cities. Mr. Kadyrov said he would fully liberate the eastern regions of Luhansk and Donetsk and then take Kyiv and all other cities. This comes as the conflict in Ukraine has shifted east, where Ukrainian forces are battle-hardened and well-prepared. Russian officials have said that the focus of its forces is now complete liberation of the Donbass, broadly referring to Luhansk and Donetsk. In the meantime, there have been reports of profiling and detention of Nigerians and other African nationals in Poland. and in detention centers there. That is something the Nigerian government, through the Nigerians in Diaspora Commission, has condemned. And this was coming from the Commission's chairman, Abike Dabiri-Erewa, who spoke at a psychosocial trauma clinic for Ukrainian detainees organized in partnership with the National Commission for Refugees, Migrants and Internally Displaced Persons, as well as a Project Victory Call initiative in Abuja. She says that though President Muhammadu Buhari had made every necessary arrangement for Nigerians caught up in the war in Ukraine to return home, some, however, chose to remain in some countries like Poland, stressing that the most appropriate action for Poland was to return them home to their home countries rather than keep them in detention centers. The federal government had approved more than $8 million for the evacuation of at least 5,000 Nigerians from Ukraine.
Now, I know that as I speak with you, there's another crisis brewing. Some of the returnees who went to Poland. Now, there were some Nigerians, when they got to Poland, Romania, Hungary, they didn't want to come back. I was saying this, it's voluntary. But some who went to Poland and refused to come back and are not properly documented are now locked up in detention centers under very inhumane condition. Now, they are being locked up in detention centers because of the color of their skin. The whites are not being locked up in detention centers, but blacks that are in Poland are being arrested. They will tell you don't have a documentation, although you're a refugee that fled from Ukraine, and they are being locked up in very terrible circumstances in detention centers in Poland. This is unacceptable. Everybody should reject it and tell the Polish authorities, release those you put in detention centers. The worst you can do is send them back to their countries. Although we as Nigeria, thanks to President Buhari, gave everybody the opportunity to return.
I'd just like to encourage the recipients of these services to take advantage of it. It's available for you. You know, in Nigeria, when we talk about mental health, we think somebody is alone. Mental health means that you want to just address some issues, things that are going around your head, so that you know that you're not alone and you have support and you just discuss things that are happening in your life with people. So we're here to support you 100%. I'm looking forward to the success of this program and to future collaborations with the PVC platform, and I welcome you all today.
And when we return, Ukrainian diaspora in traditional costumes sing for brothers at home as more flee there. Please stay on with us. Thanks for staying tuned. Welcome back to the program. I understand that we've sorted out the audio challenge we had with Dr. Johnson Aniki, who is joining us from Kyiv, the capital of Ukraine. Dr. Aniki, can you hear me loud and clear now? Can you hear me? Dr. Aniki, welcome to the program. We still seem to be having this challenge with the audio with Dr. Aniki. But in the meantime, let's tackle some other stories while we try to see how that is possible, how we can sort that out at the moment. Russian missile airstrikes are said to have completely ruined the airport in the Ukrainian city of Dnipro and a village in the region. Head of the Ukrainian military region, Valentin Reznichenko, confirmed the attack on social media, saying he was also trying to get more information about the damage and the casualties. Satellite images from Maxar Technologies have shown what could be a large Russian military convoy located east of Kharkiv. The pictures were taken on a Friday. They show hundreds of armored vehicle trucks with towed artillery and other military vehicles stretching for at least 8 miles and moving south through the Ukrainian town of Velky Volok. Ukraine claims that Russian forces who occupied the former Chernobyl nuclear plant stole radioactive substances from research laboratories that could potentially kill them. According to Ukraine's state agency for managing the exclusion zone, Russian troops entered a storage area of the Eco Center research base and stole 133 highly radioactive substances. They say the location of the stolen substances are currently unknown. Just last week, Ukraine's energy minister, German Gulashenko, said Russian soldiers had exposed themselves. And to a shocking amount of nuclear radiation, saying some of them may have less than a year, in fact, to live. In the meantime, Ukraine's prosecutor says 1,222 bodies have been found in the Kyiv region since Russian forces withdrew. Authorities say they are investigating 5,600 cases of alleged war crimes committed by Russian troops since the invasion began, and it had identified over 500 suspected war criminals, including top military and government officials in Russia. Here is more on the Russian invasion of Ukraine in this report.
Satellite images taken on Friday, April the 8th, 2022, showed a long military column moving through the Ukrainian town of Veliki heading south towards the Donbass region. Private U.S. company Maxa Technology said the images showed an 8-mile column, shop-wing armored vehicles, trucks towing artillery and support equipment. Russia has failed to take one major city since the start of the invasion on February the 24th, but Ukraine says Russia is gathering its forces on the east for a major assault and has urged people to flee. The war has been hard on Ukrainian civilians, many whose homes and means of livelihood have been destroyed by Russian military airstrikes. Villagers in Ukraine's northern Chernihiv region on Saturday recall surviving weeks of shelling by Russian forces from cellars of their homes. 62-year-old retiree Natalia Titova said the top of her house started burning and they had to run outside. Others like Alexander Makov, who helped evacuate hundreds of civilians from his village, said he lived in his cellar for 42 days. Most of his neighborhood has been reduced to mounds of debris. On Sunday, a grave with at least 2 civilian bodies was found in the village of Buzova, near the capital Kyiv. It is the latest report of such discovery since the Russian withdrawal from areas north of the capital. In the nearby town of Borodyanka, authorities continue to dig through the rubble of destroyed apartment blocks in their search for dozens of missing residents. Russian Defense Military released on Sunday footage of attack helicopters saying that its forces had destroyed a convoy of Ukraine's armored vehicles and anti-aircraft warfare. A statement from the Defense Ministry says attack helicopters Ka-52 destroyed weapons and military equipment of the armed forces of Ukraine. Ukrainian military officials were not immediately available for comment. Reuters news agency said the military published video footage of attack Ka-52 helicopters flying at extremely low altitude, launching missiles and firing from guns at ground targets. The location and the timing of the target was not specified. Meanwhile, Russian forces also claim to have destroyed an ammunition depot at the Myroron Air Base in central eastern Ukraine. A Ukrainian Air Force MiG-29 fighter and the Mi-8 helicopter were also destroyed in the attack on the base in the Poltava region, according to Ukrainian Defense Military, adding that a large ammunition depot was destroyed near the city of Novomoscow in the central eastern Dnipro region.
U.S. banks may have left Russia, but it seems they are still making money from the sanctions on Russia. New sanctions by the U.S. Treasury, which blocked Russian access to any dollars it held in American banks, significantly increased the chances that Russia would default on its debt and that its gross domestic product, the main measure of a country's economic strength, would tumble. The idea is what is known as a negative basis trade, purchasing dirt cheap Russian government or corporate bonds, along with credit default swaps, which act as insurance on the potential default of a borrower. Let's talk about this, what it all means, with Ini John Mekwa, who joins me on the program. Hi, Ini.
Good morning.
What is this about, anyway? I know that we had discussed the fact that Russia has no access to the dollars it has in the US or in other Western countries. But what is this whole idea about those banks now making money off this?
Exactly. So what has happened is, you remember we talked about the rating of Russian bond, which is now up to junk rate at this time. And with this major possible default, because they're in the 30th day of grace now, so you can't say they've defaulted, but it looks like they will default. So what's happening is people who have these bonds, the investors in the bond who have the security papers, are trying to sell it off. So instead of losing it totally, losing their investment totally, they are trying to sell it off even at cheaper rates. So that's what you mean by the negative
basis trading. Okay.
Yes. So even if at a cheaper rate, they are willing to sell it off. So the interesting thing is JP Morgan and some other US banks are the ones facilitating this trade. And of course, they have their fees. So eventually, even though they have left Russia, they are not transacting business there, they are still making some fees out of this. And it's a whole lot of trading going on, because we see that about $7 billion of the bond is now available for trade. So people are just anxious that, let me just get it off, even if I'm not making the profit I should have made, by investing in this.
Yes.
I don't want to wait for the 30-day grace to elapse because I don't know what's going to happen there. Let me just get it off. And there are some other individuals and institutions, organizations who have larger appetite for risk, because eventually...
Yeah, we're going to get around to the paying for this anyway.
Yes,
They're going to pay for it. And whoever it is that has got the stomach for the time will probably clean out.
Because, the sanctions, Russia might just get out of this tomorrow. They might just leave Ukraine tomorrow. In a couple of months, it's still their money that is being sanctioned in the U.S. banks and in the U.S. Reserve. It's still their money. It's still their gold. So if the sanctions go off today, they have access. Guess what? Then the bond become more valuable again. So anybody who could take the risk can now make much, much more money than even the original
person who bought. That's it.
Exactly. So it's a risk. It's a risk thing, but
there are those who say, well, without risk, there's no reward.
Exactly. So
now. Vehicles from Russia and Belarus are banned from the rest of Europe.
Yes. So vehicles are registered with Russia and Belarus cannot. The EU has put a sanction on that. They're always talking about additional
sanctions. Yes.
Yeah. So now they cannot go through. They cannot be cleared. They cannot be owned. You can't buy them. But the interesting thing is that vehicles that are meant for pharmaceuticals, that are meant for energy, that are meant for fertilizer, that are meant for food, are allowed to go through. So eventually it seems like...
many cars will hide under all these exemptions.
Exactly, because the list of the exemptions is long. And it looks like what the European needs is what they allow. So they need pharmaceuticals. They get a lot of fertilizer from Russia, so they're going to allow it. So it just looks like this sanction...
Russia, of course, all of this is sanctions is leading to massive brain drain. A lot of people are leaving.
Yes.
Those, especially with the skills in technology and all of that.
Yes. Well, so a lot of Russians living in Russia are facing, it's not very exciting times for them. I mean, for you can go on your phone, you get information, you get on any of the apps. It's not working like that for them because you don't have Instagram. Okay, they're still allowing WhatsApp. You don't have Facebook. You don't have some of those major apps that people use. But Russia had tried, they've tried to launch theirs. They call it Rosgram. It's supposed to replace Instagram. But unfortunately, it's been since the 24th of February. No, it was on the 14th of March that Instagram was banned in Russia. And that day was when Rosgram was supposed to be launched. But as we speak, it's still not working. Now, they have some other, following the path of China, they have their own homegrown.
Yes.
So they have YK. And then they have Yandex. But unfortunately, even these two have their own issues. They cannot meet up with the demands as we speak. One of them, that's Yandex, the CEO resigned last week. She was supposed to resign later on this year. Her tenure was supposed to expire, but she just resigned and no reason was given for her resignation. And then the other one, the VDix, the VK, he is also one of the oligarchs that has been sanctioned. And then Dutch has about some millions of dollars investment in VK, and they are withdrawing their investment. So it's the space, that technology space, social media space is very lean as we speak. And of course, a lot of brain drain has happened. The minister last week, I think on Thursday or so, came to make some announcements, additional benefit for workers to come in.
To get them to stay and to get those who left to come back.
And even to encourage more domestic companies to work on technology and see if they can bring in social media and some of those things. But, you know, these things don't just happen like that. And because
not in a war situation.
Yes, not in a war situation, because they depend a lot on technology from the West, for the brains, for the equipment, for the software. Most of those things come from the West, so it's not really easy for them at this time.
In Kazakhstan, surprisingly, banks are benefiting. So it's not only U.S. banks that are benefiting.
Yes, it's not only U.S. Yeah, yes. A lot of Russians and Belarusians have gone to open accounts. I think about 12,000 of them between the beginning of the war and at this time. They've gone to open their accounts there just as a way to keep their money safe and then maybe sidestep some of the sanctions, you know, and because they cannot do international transactions.
Yeah, because Russia is out of SWIFT.
Yes, so a lot of people are flocking there, and some of them are even moving there, we hear, because it's easy for them. They share a common zone. I think they have a free trade zone, so it's easier for them. They move there, they get jobs easier there. It's easier for them to settle, and that seems to be what's happening at this time.
All of this is happening as the war on the ground in Ukraine continues to progress. Ine, thank you so much. There'll be more on all of the stories on Business Morning and Business Incorporated, so please do join Ine and Ladi for that. Thank you very much.
Yes.
Let's talk to Dr. Chuka Chukube, who is an associate professor, Russian language and integration at the Department of European Languages and Integration Studies in the University of Lagos. He joins us virtually. Good morning, Dr. Chukube. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Ladi. It's my pleasure to be here.
Let me ask this question basically. Earlier, we had the chairman of the Nigerians and Diaspora Commission, Mrs. Abike Dabiri Erewa, complaining officially on behalf of the federal government about the treatment some Nigerians are receiving from the Polish authorities. She was very specific about the Polish authorities in that case. But we have also had reports of some of the neighboring countries and even Ukraine itself tending towards some racist behavior, especially when it comes to people of color and all of that. Is this, I mean, you're a professor of European languages and integration. Is this normal, would you say, given the cultural traits and so on of the people in that region?
Actually, it is not normal. But, you know, it's unfortunate that we are witnessing the whole thing now. But naturally, the issue of the issue of segregation against especially blacks have been there. And though it is not right to see it at this time of invasion of Ukraine by Russia, but we can't rule it out that it has always been there. You know, some of us that had the opportunity of studying in Russia or Ukraine or when it was the Soviet Union actually witnessed this. But the amazing thing and the bad thing of it is that it is happening in Poland now that there is crisis in, so it is not normal. It shouldn't be. It shouldn't be.
Let me ask further then, if as you say, it shouldn't be, even though you do also reference the fact that even when people like yourselves were in studies in what was known then as the old Soviet Union, you did witness some of this. There is also this tendency even within the countries. I have read reports and I've had discussions with some of my colleagues who have talked about the fact that even within societies like Ukraine and Russia, you have people of mixed parentage, people who are whose parents are, half white, half black, let me put it that way. And the children then face discrimination because they are not seen as being full-blooded Ukrainians, but at the same time, they are not seen as complete whatever the other group it is that they are from. Is this deeply ingrained in culture, do you think? Or is it something that is the disposition of those who have never seen such people in large numbers, outside their communities?
I think it is naturally there, and especially those children with mixed parentage, their own situation is worse. Such people always find it difficult to mix freely with real Russians or Ukrainians. They are tagged and named different names. Sometimes they are called Shoni, blacks. Sometimes they are called Kofis Malakom, that is milk and the coffee. In other words, it is not clear to be white or it's not clear to be black. And that discrimination has always been there, especially for these people. Well, if you are a black person and you are called a black man, or sometimes they call you different names, monkey, yes, well, it is understandable. But when you see somebody who is half Russian and half black, their own situation is usually worse because even at schools, at places of work, they're segregated against. Therefore, it has been there. But it is still bad that it is still in existence. I was talking in the time of the old, but that it is obvious that it's still happening in modern Russia and modern Ukraine. It is condemnable. It's bad.
Let's come to the two societies themselves now, Russia and Ukraine. So many people that I've spoken to both in the run-up to and once this invasion started have said that basically the Ukrainians and the Russians, for want of a better word, are the difference between 6 and half a dozen in terms of culture, in terms of the way they think, in terms of their assimilative principles, in terms of their educational structure, even their military command is very similar. Is that true from your viewpoint?
Yes. You won't forget that Russia and Ukraine have always been seen as one country, and also Belarus. The two of them are known to have one inheritance of what they call themselves as, coming from a particular place in Russia. In the old Russia, not even Soviet Union. So they have seen themselves as ethnically being together. So there is a lot of similarities in their culture and attitude. But then, if you are talking now that there is Russian invasion in Ukraine, because of mixed children or even their own people, it is obvious that before the war started, or let me say from the time of the disintegration of the Soviet Union, they had seen themselves as different countries. This is to say that prior to that time, there have not been major practice. But with from the time of disintegration of the Soviet Union, there is wide division between the two countries now. And it became worse from 2014, when Russia invaded the Crimea Peninsula. It wasn't so nice, but that was the beginning of the crisis. And now that the war has started in Ukraine, there's a wide difference in relationship between Ukrainian and Russian, even among those that had intermarriages. Of course, before this time, it is only normal that if you are from Ukraine, you know you are Ukraine. And if you are an Ukrainian and you are in Russia, yes, you are seen as a brother or a sister, but you are from a different country. And it is a very big problem. It is causing a lot of misunderstanding among Russians and Ukrainians. So, but as it is today, it is getting worse as long as this crisis is still on in Ukraine.
Some of the people I've spoken to as well, and some of them have in fact been scholars like you, have said that as a country, or as countries go, Ukraine is in fact older than Russia as a country. But somehow, in the course of history, Russia has become stronger, bigger, more economically successful than Ukraine, and that to a large extent, this has fanned the resentment in Ukraine against Russia, and that the Russians have always seen Ukraine as like younger brothers, so to speak. If this is true, and I want you to confirm if it is, then why is the animosity of such a level as to lead to military conflict?
Okay, like I said before, Russia, Ukraine, and Belarus in the old Russian Empire were regarded as little Russians. In other words, they saw themselves as one country. And even today, an average Russian believes that somebody from Ukraine or somebody from Belarus, that they have that close relations. However, in 1804, there was this a need for Russians to demilitarize Ukraine, especially. And that was when the Ukrainian language was banned, teaching of Ukrainian in universities or in schools were banned and all whatnot. And that started the animosity between the two countries. And later, during the Soviet time, we know, especially at this Crimea Peninsula, well, it was inherited by the Crimea Tatars, as the history said. Now, during the Second World War, they were seen, or in fact, it was Stalin that saw them as having aided Germany, and Stalin labeled them Nazists. So what that led to was that many of them were exiled into Siberia, and the whole vacuum of the space of the present-day Crimea was open. And a lot of Russians, well, apart from Russians, other nationalities inhabited there, but Russians are in the majority. So now Russians living there, and according to Russia, even a single soul of Russia living in any of the former Soviet republics is still a Russian. And it is the duty of the government to protect such a person. And that explains why in 2014, Russia had to go and then took over Crimea. This did not go so well with the Ukrainians, no doubt about it. But with that, from that time, that animosity started. And until today, when the real invasion started, it has been terrible. And it didn't exclude the military too. An average military man from Ukraine knows that Russia military man is his brother, but there is that tag that has been there that has caused enmity between them, and they are not in a haste to clear it. Maybe at the end of this invasion, nobody knows when it will end. Some say 1 week, months, or years, as the case may be. But maybe when it ends, the two countries will begin to, get themselves together again, try to create more conducive environment and understanding that will help them to understand themselves more of what they used to be and what they are now.
Indeed, one can only hope that that will be the result at the end of all of this. Dr. Chuka Chukwube, Associate Professor, Russian Language and Integration at the University of Lagos. Thank you for your time this morning and for your perspective.
Thank you very much, Lade.
When we return, Ukraine set to refuse International Shooting Sports Federation's assistance. Please stay with us. Welcome back. At no better time, our country is ready to shell out donations than when there is a crisis. That's right, a donors conference held at the weekend, attended by the European Commission and the Canadian government. In the end, a combined 9.1 billion euros was raised for refugees who have fled Ukraine to neighboring countries. Governments, companies and individuals together pledged 4.1 billion euros, which will be distributed largely via the Ukrainian authorities or the United Nations. The other 5 billion euros were loans and grants from European Union financial institutions, including a 4 billion euro program to help provide housing, education and healthcare for refugees arriving in EU countries.
But I can only announce today for the European Commission that we want to pledge 1 billion euros. 600 million of those will go to Ukraine, to the Ukrainian authorities and partially to the United Nations so that the Ukrainian authorities who know exactly who is in need, can distribute that. And 400 million euros will go to the frontline states that are doing such an outstanding job and helping the refugees that are coming.
Above all, we are sending a message to every single Ukrainian in the cities and villages under siege. A message of hope to the brave Ukrainian soldiers, heroes defending their country from the aggressor. Dear brothers and sisters, you are not alone.
Let's keep working to mobilize governments around the world, private companies, and the people in our communities to support refugees from Ukraine and indeed support all Ukrainians.
But I would like Ukrainian courage to be shared by everyone in the world. They have to do everything to force Russia to seek peace. They have to do everything to hold Russian soldiers and their commanders accountable for their crimes against the Ukrainian people. Sanctions must be imposed against all Russian banks. Russian oil embargo must be imposed. We have asked for weapons. We've asked for financial assistance. We have asked for support to Ukrainian migrants, for those 10 million people forced by Russia to flee their homes. The democratic world had the power to help. Ukrainian courage deserves respect.
Ukraine has warned that it will refuse to accept financial help from the International Shooting Sports Federation, the ISSF, if it is provided personally by President Vladimir Putin, that's Russia's richest man. In a strongly worded letter to the shooting community, the Ukrainian Shooting Federation claimed that a previous correspondence calling for an extraordinary meeting of the ISSF to discuss the position of Putin and Secretary General Alexander Ratner, another Russian, was ignored. Putin has been among the most outspoken critics of Mr. Putin's decision to invade Ukraine, including the effect it will have on Russia's economy, but the USF has accused him of being involved in the war. And the International Skating Union Council has called on its members for suggestions on how to further sanction Russia and Belarus as the invasion of Ukraine continues following a meeting in Lausanne. The governing body had already banned skaters from the two countries from competing in its competitions. However, as the offensive continues, it has written to member federations asking for comments on some proposed decisions regarding the consequences of the war in Ukraine. A deadline has been set for April 18th for recommendations. The body has also reserved a budget of $213,000 to support the Ukrainian Skating Federation and their members amidst the crisis. And just before we go, a Kyiv shelter for animals has become a safe haven for pets abandoned by their owners fleeing the Russian invasion. Veterinarians at the shelter have welcomed dogs and cats of all sizes, some found in streets and some rescued from apartments where they had been locked in. Artem, who works as a veterinarian in the shelter, says he anticipates a large number of neglected animals on city streets when the war is over. Another veterinarian at the shelter, Yevgenia Dronina, says it was difficult for people fleeing to take their pets too. Kyiv, Ukraine's second biggest city, remains under attack by Russian forces. Talk about unintended consequences, perhaps intended. That's our program this morning. Thanks for being with us. There'll be an update at 5 o'clock, and the show is back tomorrow at 9 a.m. I'm Ladi Akredolu. Have a great Monday and week ahead.